Okay, Council, I'm going to call the public hearing of Tuesday, February 25th to order. And can we have the roll call, please, Clerk?
Yes. Mayor Stewart in the chair, Councillor Carr, Councillor DeGenova, not in the chamber, Councillor Fry, not in the chamber, Councillor Swanson, Councillor Hardwick, Councillor Wiebe, Councillor Boyle, Councillor Dominato, not in the chamber, Councillor Blythe on leave of absence, and Councillor Kirby-Young. You have quorum.
Thank you. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and thank them for having care for these lands for millennia, and enjoying working with them as partners as we move forward building this great city together. I want to thank all the staff who do an awesome job every day, and thanks so much for that. Just to remind folks that are attending today about the conduct in the public gallery. So I'd like you to refrain from addressing council members without permission or applauding or otherwise interrupting council member or speakers addressing council. And if you could respect my direction as chair so that we can create a respectful environment for council, the public, and staff at today's meetings. Just so everyone knows, speakers have 5 minutes to make their comments and should limit their comments to the merits of the report being considered and state whether you oppose or support the report, the recommendations. You may only speak once as a speaker, and you can follow along at Twitter, on Twitter at Vancity Clerk for updates on the progress of the meeting so you don't miss your turn to speak. Any comments in the public agenda can be submitted in writing to publichearing@vancouver.ca, publichearing@vancouver.ca. If you're speaking on behalf of a group, you have up to 8 minutes to speak, but those folks will also have to be here with you and identified at the meeting, either in person or by a representative of the group, and you can't be a speaker yourself. And if we don't hear from all speakers this evening, we'll recess and reconvene the meeting on Thursday, February 27th at 6 p.m. here in council chambers. Just also a reminder that we're a quasi-judicial body, meaning that we only consider the merits of the rezoning application or heritage designation in front of us. Council members may ask clarifying questions from speakers, including the applicant, or technical advice from staff, but should save debate for after the close of speakers. After hearing from speakers, council may approve in principle the application, refuse the application, or defer the application for further consideration. Let's see. Before I begin, I'd like to remind council we need to move the recommendation for item 1 together with the yellow memorandum dated February 25th entitled Tax Amendment, Simplified and Expanded Zoning and Development Regulations for Passive House Projects. The memo is intended to provide additional information to council, but no further action is required. So now clerk will read the application and summary of correspondence.
This is an application by the General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability to amend the zoning and development bylaw provisions for certified passive house projects, except laneway houses, to respond to directives in Vancouver's Climate Emergency Response Report and remove barriers to building to the passive house standard. The following correspondence has been received since referral to public hearing and prior to the close of the speakers list and receipt of public comments. 4 pieces of correspondence in support and 4 pieces of correspondence in opposition. This represents all correspondence received up to 5 p.m. today.
Thanks very much. And we don't have a presentation, but we have Andrea Wickham from the Sustainability Group to answer questions. Or maybe Doug Smith. Thanks very much. Did you want to address us? Or? Okay, great. So, Councillor Swanson, you've got the floor for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I have a question about the yellow memo. When you say the proposed amendments are available only to high-performance buildings, what's a high-performance building?
You just have a problem with the microphone here?
Oh, that's what that means.
Just 1 second. I'll just stop your time, Councillor Swanson, while we work on the mics. Don't seem to be working.
So it's
just have to wait, Councillor. Yeah, no, it's actually Mr. Smith's mic.
maybe to save us some time, I can speak to the question if you'd like, Council. High-performance building means ones that are super energy efficient, like Passive House certified, as an example.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I don't see, none of these mics seem to be working. Clerk's mics are working. Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Excellent. Okay, anything else, Councillor Swanson? No. Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr.
Yes, thank you. I've got a number of questions. My first question is, when you use the term passive house standard, there's been some confusion on whether that means passive house certified. Can you please explain what the difference might be and where do we get the word standard from?
To introduce myself, my name is Doug Smith. I'm the Director of Sustainability for the City of Vancouver here. When we say passive house standard as opposed to certified, it means that you go through the passive house checklist, and there's essentially a spreadsheet that you go through to add up a certain amount of points. The Director of Planning has the ability to figure out, to agree on what is an acceptable standard to that level. Passive house certified is a little bit higher than what the passive house standard we would look at, so it's a slightly different standard, but it's essentially a very high performance building. Right. And there are some other Canadian versions of that that meet that standard that we would consider.
Right. So it is our checklist, the City of Vancouver checklist?
No, it's actually the Passive House EnerPhit checklist that is done by Passive House, and it would just add up to a certain score for that building.
Okay, so I've heard that the cost is higher. Is it higher if you actually go through certification or no?
It is slightly higher for certification. It's kind of, you think of it like a hockey stick. To get that last couple of percent may require some things that we don't feel are absolutely necessary, especially with our energy grid being 100% or 98% renewable, that we don't need to meet the same stringent standards as you would find internationally.
Okay, a couple of more questions. How many, there's been concern, and we've had, as council, all of us received correspondence from the Character Home Network around the impact that this might have on character homes, and because of the, in their statement, the disadvantage of retention bonusing for character homes versus for the passive house buildings. So the first thing in their correspondence, they talked about the proposal being a 16% increase in FSR for detached homes and 18% for duplexes. I'm not reading that in this report. I'm reading it. But so if you could maybe explain that for me.
Sure. The actual... The way this program works is when you build to a higher energy, like a passive house standard, you end up with wider walls, you end up with more insulation in the roof, and you end up with more equipment in the building itself, which takes up more space. So the majority of this, of the existing change that's been in place since 2018 is 12% really associated with that extra space to make sure that the homeowner is made whole. Essentially, they're not being penalized. They're not losing space for building to a higher standard as per the city's direction that we want to do. There's an additional 4% on top of that 12% that we're giving as an incentive. So the actual incentive to the homeowner is really only 4%. The rest is just to not penalize them for doing that. And then a duplex gets slightly more incentive on top of that.
Okay. And is there an incentive for a owner of a character home or a heritage home to renovate to a passive house standard?
Yes, there is. So the existing character home incentive program is 6%. So if you do a renovation to your character home, you can add 6% density to that house. If you also decide to upgrade to a passive house standard and do energy efficiency at the same time, you can stack those two incentives and get an additional 4% on top, which would make a total of a 10%. So there is sort of additional incentive to do both.
Okay, so so that would be compared to the 4% for FSR, it's a 10% if you retain the home and make it passive. Is in the case of a character home. Okay.
That is correct.
That's good to know. How about how many properties are you anticipating being affected? And I'm thinking specifically of housing of properties where there are character homes or heritage homes. That's the concern of people who've been writing into us.
Based on previous numbers, we would expect 1 or 2 homes a year would be impacted out of the 1,400 that are built every year. We saw about 10 homes per year take advantage of this over the last few years, but only a small percentage, 1 or 2 of those homes would have been character homes.
Okay. And in terms of your hope that some of these extra incentives would increase the number of applications, do you have any kind of ballpark of what you're hoping to see in terms of increased numbers of passive homes?
We're just at 5.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
On to Councillor Hardwick.
Hi there. I'm going to carry on because I'm looking at Appendix A, page 2, 10.23A4, which talks about excluding 16% of the floor area on a one-family dwelling or a one-family dwelling with a secondary suite. And then I'm looking at the yellow memo where I see approximately 4% of the building area for a single passive and less the bonus density for character retention at 6%. I think because we're banding these various numbers around, it really would have been helpful to chart it out to make it a little bit easier to understand. But I'm still struggling with it. I don't know if you totally got it there, Councillor Carr. Could you lay it out for us again? What's going on here?
Sure, absolutely. When you build a high-performance house, you take up more space for insulation and for equipment. What we used to do over the last couple of years is a homeowner or the builder on behalf of that homeowner would have to fill out a whole bunch of checklists and actually calculate the amount of space that was being lost to building these high-performance homes. They would submit that to staff. Staff would then do a detailed review and then say, yes, we will give you 11%, 12%, 13%, depending on that calculation. We realize after 2 years of this that that's kind of a redundant calculation. It's really consistently 12%. So we're just saying we're going to give you 12% right out of the box to deal with the additional space you need to meet these requirements. On top of that 12%, we're now giving the homeowners an additional 4% as an incentive because they're taking a bit of a risk. They're building a type of house that is relatively new to the market. They're putting in new products, different windows, different equipment in that house. And so it's a bit of an incentive to try to encourage people to do it so the marketplace and the builders themselves can learn about this. So the 12% is fixed based on the building itself, and the 4% is the actual incentive.
Okay, but still hard to align the yellow memo with the main report. The question, here's another question about single-family houses. Talked about single-family houses with secondary suites. Would this also apply to duplexes?
This would apply to duplexes, I'm checking, yes.
And we're talking about character houses and heritage in the same breath, but of course they're two distinctly different things. Heritage having expressed merit and character being just generally described as pre-1940. Don't we have a process already where we evaluate those pre-1940 houses to determine whether they're worth saving?
I actually don't know that much about the Character House Retention Program, so I might have to defer that question to
Hugh McLean, Planning, Urban Design, and Sustainability. Yes, there is a formal review process where we look at character buildings. Development planners, not heritage planners, but they go through a process where they have a checklist and they look at a number of components, things like porches, roofing, massing, integrity. All those things are taken into consideration as to whether it's a character building or not.
Indeed. So there would, when someone was determining whether they wanted to develop a passive house, it would make a difference whether it was heritage or whether it was character, and whether it was worth preserving in the character category.
Yes, I mean, the same outcome would be expected in terms of a character building, in terms of the exterior treatment. It would the passive treatments, as I understand them, would be interior components. They wouldn't affect how it looked on the exterior.
Thank you very much. I think that answers my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Genova.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, I did have a question about accessibility and exemption for accessibility. I didn't really clearly see that in the report. So in understanding that this is how we'd like people to move forward, but accessibility is something that we also consider here at the City of Vancouver. Is there extra floor space exemption for making something accessible to an adaptability level 3 or beyond standard? Considering the extra room, you said that.
Yeah, that was not included in this report.
Okay.
I'm not aware of a standard that allows that already. No.
Okay, so could we see an accessible home be built in the passive house guidelines that are here before us today?
Yes, you absolutely could see an accessible modifications to a house and still meet passive house guidelines.
Okay, and would it be the discretion of the Director of Planning, or would there be a way forward that applicants could, instead of just going one by one, ask for those exemptions if they needed wider hallway space, if they needed turning radius? I'm aware that Councillor Wiebe is the liaison to the Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee, but being the liaison for a number of years, for 6 years at Park Board as well, I understand that this is something that, they feel very strongly about. So I was wondering if there was another policy that could be applied with this to allow for that.
What I would recommend is staff take that back and look at what's currently allowed by the Director of Planning, and then bring a memo back to Council in response to that.
Okay, or would that be dealt with in the accessible path work that staff are doing that could be dealt with in passive coming up is a way to not have to make staff bring forward another memo to
Yeah, if it's dealt with within that, we would do that.
Great, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Swanson.
Yeah, so we're getting all these letters saying that this will incentivize the demolition of heritage homes. So can you visualize why people are saying that?
I believe that people who have that concern maybe misunderstood the report as far as what's available to what's available to character homes, and also what's available to do these incentives. I also feel that, and I'm guessing here a little bit of what their concerns would be, that maybe they didn't understand the volume or the number of homes that would be impacted, 1 or 2 a year perhaps, which I don't feel would have a material impact on the city's overall character home stock.
But isn't the incentive supposed to increase the volume?
The incentive is to encourage people who are building a new house already to consider going to a higher standard to make it passive house, which will support the industry and move the whole program forward quicker.
So they're building a new house, they're not retaining an old one?
You can retain the old house and do the renovation at the same time, or you can build a new house.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And that's it for, Councillor Fry.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Smith. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out the math here. There's a 12%. Okay, so there's a 4% bonus. There's 12% bonus for the actual space to equip the extra thickness of walls and that kind of thing, correct?
Correct.
And then a 4% additional bonus for just going passive house for a total of 16%.
Correct.
Now, on the heritage incentive side, am I following it? There's an extra 6% for heritage retention or character home retention?
That would be correct.
On top of the 16, so you're ending up with 24%.
That sound right? Yeah. Yes.
Yes? Okay. Or 22. Yeah, sorry. I can't do math. Yeah, all right. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hardwick, you have 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Yeah, I just had a little bit left. Again, I want to come back to the difference between heritage and character, and the differentiation between the two. We've seen depletion of character homes, and forgive me, but certainly on the heritage side, I would like to see no heritage buildings deconstructed in connection with passive house, because our heritage houses are so special. I take your point, but we've lost so many character houses, which is why there's a narrative, why there's a group that we're talking to about this. So I just wanted to make sure that that has been considered, because character houses, you can say it's no good, we're not going to save it, but heritage there should be no exceptions around heritage.
A question?
Yes, am I accurate in my depiction between the two? Heritage, no deconstruction.
Just 10
and
seconds.
Character, maybe.
Can I jump in?
Just have 10 seconds, yeah. So.
This is unrelated to this report. This report is about new construction. The ability to demolish a heritage house versus a character is unrelated to what is actually in this topic.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so that's it for questions. We do have some folks that want to speak to this. So we have Bryn Davidson from the Lane Fab Design. Thanks so much for coming in. You have up to 5 minutes. You may have questions from councillors.
Hi there, I'm Bryn Davidson. I'm co-owner of Lane Fab. We design and build custom homes in Vancouver. For the last 10 years, we've been building every single project beyond the code. 10 years ago, we built the first laneway house in the city of Vancouver, and it had 13-inch thick walls and triple glazed windows. And we have done that on every single project since then, at our own time and expense, figuring out how to navigate the process of doing that. 10 years ago, we negotiated the first thick wall exclusion so that our green buildings weren't getting penalized on floor area, because it was insane that you would try to do a green building and then face a penalty. So we've navigated this increasingly complex and interesting sort of way of trying to make these things possible. And now we're building all passive houses. We're doing all of our single-family homes to the passive house standard. And the walls of those projects are 17 inches thick. So your 11 by 17 piece of paper is the thickness of that wall. So when we put all those incentives and other things together, it's great, it gets us there, but it becomes very complicated. So what this motion is doing is taking a whole bunch of existing stuff and bundling it into a very simple package, and then putting a little incentive on the end. For 10 years, we've been asking for just the tiniest little bit of incentive, because when a client comes through the door, they're already going to build a house. And 3/4 of them, I'm introducing the idea of passive house to them. I'm telling them, take your basic house you're going to do anyway, and let's upgrade to passive house. And there's great incentives from zoning and other types of things, but if I can say there's an extra 3 or 4% of floor area, all of a sudden clients say, yes, let's do it. So it's a little bit of thing that can have potentially a really big impact. And so I think this is actually quite profound and really important that we support this initiative. What we do in Vancouver scales up, gets read about internationally, and gets taken to other cities. So it's not just about a couple of homes. The impact locally is very small, but the idea of this and how that translates into city building is really important. So I'm hoping that you can support that.
Thanks very much. I have questions. Councillor Dejanova, up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Really appreciate your comments. Wanted to ask you about accessibility, and I'm sure you might have heard my question to staff, but do you feel that if there's another policy that comes after this that addresses accessibility and maybe exemption for a little bit of FSR that might be needed for accessibility, among other things that I know that perhaps you have already shared input with our staff on? Do you think that bundling this up without accessibility will hinder that, or do you think that multiple policies can be applied to this?
I think they can be done separately. I think the accessibility is critical. There's a couple of key things. We could make the buildings a few feet taller and make it so we don't have to have basements. Every single one of these projects could be fully accessible. The only reason our projects aren't accessible is because of the way our zoning is written. So I really hope we address that, but we can do that separate from this motion, which is also very important.
Okay, thank you. Another question that I had, and it's more to Councillor Hardwick's question around heritage, character. I understand the difference, but both in places in Vancouver allow infill. In the form of laneway homes, perhaps, or in First Shaughnessy, there's the HRA. I'm just wondering, do you feel that this will be helpful at perhaps if someone wanted to proceed with a laneway home, that it would make it more clear for them to be able to do that on character home site?
Well, this particular policy isn't going to impact laneway houses, and it's not going to impact character at all. It's frustrating because I feel like there's a few character folks out there who constantly misrepresent the impact of some of these policies. 10 years ago, they said these same things about laneway houses. We are doing character infill projects, and when a client comes to us, it's because they've made that decision not to tear down, or they want to build something new. If somebody wants to come to us with a character house and do it to the passive house standard, we can do that. But this is only adding 4 to 6% on a project. And if in the case of a duplex, it's less density than if you have a laneway house. There's not going to be any impact on the character homes. So I think it's really it's the same scare tactic that we hear about every single zoning change to single family.
I wasn't just talking about the character. I was wondering is there a way, do you think that this helps find a way for someone who has a character home, if they wanted to build a laneway, would this kind of set, as you said, before there's been pieces in passive house, but this helps to bundle it up? And I'm sorry, I won't say it as eloquently as you, but offer a small incentive. Do you think that's the next step in getting laneway to that place as well? Whereas if someone's building a laneway, we'd want them to consider doing that in a way where maybe they built their laneway and then their main home afterwards. Some people.
Well, I would love to see passive house incentives applied to laneway houses. It's actually a little bit frustrating because we're now working to make all of our laneway houses built to step 4 of the energy code, because it's really hard to actually get it to passive house with all the various constraints that we have in place currently. So I think if some of these incentives were also applied to laneway houses, that would be great. We would go even further with those laneway house projects.
That's what I was wondering. I also was wondering if understanding this doesn't apply to specifically laneway homes, and I will maybe ask staff about this later on, but maybe I don't need to. Because I think it's quite thorough in the report, but this may bring us to laneway homes having specific standards and also bundling that up with an incentive on them as well. Is that something that you would hope for?
That's what I would hope for in a subsequent work plan. Yeah.
Thank you. But this is the first step in your...
First step. Yeah, first important step.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Hi, Mr. Davidson.
Hi.
Thanks for coming. I always appreciate it when you come to council. So just to be clear, you do work in the passive house space, but you also do work with character homes and retention. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a character infill under construction. We did a couple laneway houses at 19th and Ontario with some rehab work behind a couple of really nice character houses.
Okay, so you have a foot in kind of both camps, so to speak.
We do both.
And some
I
experience.
really love to save good character houses. I've dissuaded clients from demoing good character houses.
Okay, so on that note, to the concern that we have received with some emails that have come in your opinion, as a professional that works in the field, you don't see the concern being a key one of the fact that this will result in demolition of character or heritage homes? I just want to be very explicit.
I don't think it'll result in any new demolition of character homes. I think our character home incentives are fundamentally flawed and need to be fixed. In the moment, our character home policies are standing in the way of the high-performance multifamily housing, small-scale multifamily housing that we need to build in this city. And so our character home incentives, when they were written, were not future-proof because they were not written in a way that works with allowing the city to actually evolve the way it should be doing. Like a passive house fourplex should be a no-brainer compared to a McMansion. But our policies, the way our character home rules are set up, they take forever, they're really expensive, and they're just misaligned with what we need to do. So I would love to fix those. But the way we do it isn't by stopping good projects over here. That's just critical because again and again, we see that the character home is standing in the way of good projects. And I'd really want to fix this over here as a separate process.
And just to follow up on that for clarity, why is the character home standing in the way of good projects? Can you expand?
Just for instance, you're not allowed to do a duplex with a laneway house. And the only reason that is because they didn't want to preempt the character home incentive. And so ideally, if we're looking at the development, if we have a climate emergency and we want to have more high-performance housing, a passive house triplex or fourplex or something like that is really an ideal building form, and that should be something that's allowed to do. But if we're precluding those forms because we don't want to preempt our character homes, then we've got a real problem with our character home incentives and the way they're written. At the moment, our character home incentives treat a tiny little bungalow the same as like a 3 or 4 story big character home. Some character homes have really intrinsic fundamental value because of their size and quality. Some don't. And that little bungalow that's only 0.3 FSR, no matter what you're going to do, it's never going to have intrinsic housing value. The question is, when we tear it down, do we get something of value in its place, or do we just get a McMansion? So we're having the wrong conversation about character.
Okay. But you don't see them as mutually exclusive. You think this advances, the passive house can move forward, and we should deal with the character separately, but this is not going to negatively impact the character.
Not going to negatively. And I would love to do a passive, character passive house retrofit.
Okay.
I had some clients talk about it, but the process is a challenge.
Okay. And final question. In terms of if you could generally characterize, I know it's hard to do, but sort of the clientele of people that are looking to build a passive house or to renovate a character house, would it be fair to say that they're not really motivated by square footage? Like they have other priorities or values that are ranked more highly? It's around the retention, or it's around the type of building and the green footprint.
I mean, somebody who's building a new home.
Yeah.
The square footage always matters. I mean, we're always looking to maximize that. The increase in build costs compared to a code minimum is maybe 5 to 8%. We're getting some incentives in terms of building depth and height, and getting that little bit of extra square footage just makes it that much easier for me to say that I can do passive house on every single project. And if we want to build an industry of people where all the designers, the engineers, the builders, the planners, everybody is creating this whole community of learning and expansion, then it needs to have that little bit of incentive versus sort of doing things as business as usual.
Okay. But it's a nudge. It's not a massive, it's not tipping scales massively, and it's just giving that bit extra.
It's just a tiny bit. It's just enough that I can say you're getting this little tiny bit extra. And for most people, that's enough to tip them over the edge.
Okay. Super helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hardwick. 5 minutes.
Hello there. So I take your point. I agree the character home policy is fundamentally flawed. But I did want to touch on one thing, because there is an interface that we're experiencing on a continuum. There's no one-size-fits-all model. And I'm trying to distinguish between heritage and the range of character.
Yeah.
And so when you evaluate a character house, you look at whether it's quality or not, right? Whether it's worth maintaining and configuring as part of a new development.
I'm looking at quality and size and the height of the basement, because a lot of times much of this character stuff triggers around whether or not that basement needs to be lifted. Because as soon as we need to lift that, because that 6-foot basement already counts as floor area. So if you're going to put a bunch of money into that project, you're going to lift that house up. And as soon as you lift it, it means you're gutting the whole thing. So if there was a way to keep those houses intact as they are, they'd be great existing affordable rental and a number of other things. But the way we deal with FSR, especially around basements, means that these things are often getting gutted, at which point there's not really much left of that house. So when I look at an existing character home, I'm looking at the quality of it, but also the size. And I think that's something that's been neglected, because in the past, in the RT zones, we had a lot of these great big character homes that made really great multiple conversions, because they were the inner city streetcar neighborhoods from the 1920s where you had these big homes that made great character conversions. When you get further out into RS, you get these smaller bungalows and lower density things, which have a lot less intrinsic value as housing compared to those inner suburbs. And so we're cutting RT character ideas, pasting them onto RS and pretending like that's going to work. But it's a different urban fabric with a different history. And so we need a different approach. And as far as heritage, like if it's heritage listed, let's do whatever we need to save those. That's a totally separate issue, and I'm all on board with that. I think we should go around the city and pick whichever ones are the best and heritage list them, and and then move on with everything else. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. I had a 1931, that was gutted and rebuilt, but during the leaky condo era, unfortunately. But I take your point, and I just want to be clear that there are houses that are pre-1940 that are not really worth saving. So
Oh no, there's definitely ones that are tear downs. I mean, we just built a passive house at East 37th near Main Street, and that 1920s house was in bad shape. Like, it was not something that you were gonna keep. And in its place, we get a house with a basement suite, and it's a passive house. And so the two of them together are using much less energy than that character house was before. And that's a net win for the climate. That's new housing, less emissions in a walkable neighborhood. Like, that's what we should be doing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Weep.
Yeah, I'm just looking throughout the document. It kind of bounces back and forth. I mean, I'm looking at the summary and recommendations that talks about passive house certified. I know that when you're actually certifying and buying certified equipment, it can increase the costs quite significantly. And you're saying that some of the buildings you're moving to step code 4.
The laneway houses.
The laneway houses.
Yeah.
Do you think that's something that we should look at in this and make an amendment to ensure that we're not just dealing with passive house certified, but we're dealing with stuff that's equivalent or higher?
I don't know, the staff can answer, but I believe there is flexibility to say passive house certified or step 5 or some other zero carbon equivalent. I think there is already a degree of flexibility there. I know we generally, right now, we are certifying our passive house projects because we're being granted additional height and building depth. And my understanding anyway was that those zoning relaxations were contingent upon certification.
Okay, so you get an extra bonus thing if you are certified. However,
and some funds that we get from nearzero.ca or from ZebX, they provide a bit of money that's helping to offset the $10,000 of extra modeling and certification costs that would go into that project.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, and that's it. Thank you very much for coming in this evening. I really appreciate your input. We have Sean Riley next. Same drill, up to 5 minutes, and you may have questions.
Sure. So my name is Sean Riley, and I'm a homeowner here in Vancouver, and I'm actually one of those evil people that's decided to tear down a character house and build a duplex on an RS1 lot. And this decision is something that's evolved over a number of years. We've lived in our house in East Vancouver for 20 years now. We have 4 kids, and we've raised those 4 kids in 2,000 square feet, and we've made do. But as our children grow and our oldest moved out, we started taking a hard look at what's possible on our lot to provide a long-term living opportunity for our children. And so we made the decision to look at duplex zoning, duplexes with basement suites as a means of providing a long-term home for our family. And so we actually hired Bryn, and over the last several months, starting actually last spring, worked up a complete set of plans for our home under the existing regulations. And Bryn has done an amazing job with those drawings, but I found the process incredibly frustrating because we kept running up against things. You can't do this. A lot of just little issues. We ended up with a set of final drawings that were okay, but I felt could be better. And at a point in time, Bryn handed me the referral report that had been prepared for council. And this document, I thought, was written about my project because it addresses every issue that we've encountered in the process of arriving at these designs. And we've actually had the opportunity to sit down and look at what the drawings are under these new regulations. I'm not getting any more rooms. I'm not getting significantly more house, but I'm getting a few very small things that make the final design a little bit better. And you've gotten rid of the frustration of back and forth with city. You know, every time somebody submits something and it gets kicked back because we didn't understand the regulations or they weren't exactly clear, I pay someone to redo that. and the city pays someone to look at it again. So there is a lot of things happening here that is just simply better in the process for me as I guess the end user. And for those reasons, I really strongly support these changes.
Thanks very much. You have some questions? Councillor Hardwick, up to 5
Hi,
minutes.
Mr. Riley.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm excellent. I did bring my daughters, by the way. They're hiding in the back there. They were going to come up and strongly support it as well, but they're busy coloring.
So I don't think you're evil. So can you describe, and this is actually going to prove my point, I believe, can you describe the quality of the character house that you currently have?
We love our house. It is a 1930s. We've never quite figured out exactly when it was built. It has many amazing features in it. But one of the features it was never built with was an eave overhang. And so after 80 or 90 years of weather in this climate and periods of time where it was a rental house and periods of time where it was poorly maintained, water has gotten into the framing. We've had areas of the framing that's rotted. Our foundation is pretty inadequate. It's not... We love the interior finishes, we love the character, but the structure itself is in really, really bad shape. And, you know, we've looked at what it would take to sort of bring it up to just a very basic standard of a solid house. And we could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to end up with something that provides us no more living space, no better quality of living than what's there right now. And for us, that's simply a non-starter. We simply can't justify that cost.
So you weighed the difference between any kind of additional FSR that you could get through the character house door versus what you could get through the
I can promise you that Bryn is not lying when he says that he twists his client's arms on that. He brought it up at about 4 different stages as we talked through the design. And after 20 years of living in the house and 20 years of fixing everything that was wrong with it along the way, I'm fully aware of just how much work would be required. And at the end of the day, the plans we have are a duplex with basement suites, 4 units. We have 4 children. One day, all of our kids potentially have a place to live. The house we have right now, 2,000 square feet, and our oldest is away at university. At some point in time, he's going to boomerang back to us, and I really want somewhere other than my house to put him.
I totally get it. I like the intergenerational aspect to it. And it does, conform with the missing middle and gentle density that we want to see in neighborhoods. I think the fine point is understanding the balance between the character and the passive house in this case. So thank you very much for your illustration.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby-Yung.
Thank you for being here. So it's good to sort of hear the actual lived experience. I think Councillor Hardwick touched on it, but just for clarity, you said you get a little extra than you would otherwise. Can you just provide us specifics on what that you mean by that?
In our drawings, one of the reasons that we actually went to Bryn, besides his background with Passive House, we've seen some of his laneway house designs, and we knew that fitting everything that we wanted into our house was going to require somebody who was incredibly good at layout and fitting things into small spaces. When we went through the first design, we run into little issues like he's got to go through and figure out where all these various exclusions fit. And so if you have an exclusion for one particular thing, you can't apply it anywhere else. You have an exclusion for mechanical room. I don't pretend to know all of this stuff. When all those exclusions are put together into a single number, it gives us a little bit of flexibility to adjust the design a little bit. And that 4% is not anything more than rooms that were squeezed down to the smallest that you could, like, we're looking at bedrooms that are at the code minimum size for a bedroom, which puts you at, you can have a single bed and you can choose between a bedside table or a small dresser. And so we're able to take rooms like that and make them 1 foot bigger. It really is, it's very small square footage, but it's huge in terms of the ultimate usability of those spaces. And certainly for us, when you look at the drawings and you sort of pause and say, do we really want to go this route with all the extra cost of the passive house and that, to have these incredibly cramped rooms and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and that's it for questions. Appreciate you coming in this evening.
Thank you.
Lucio Picciano?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for allowing me to speak. I'm Lucio Picciano from DLP Architecture, and we designed and built the first certified passive house in Vancouver in 2016, and have since certified 4 more in the city, with 3 or 4 more slated for certification this year. So we have quite a bit of experience, both on the modeling and design side, but also in twisting the arm of clients to go that route. And this is an important point because without incentives, we feel that probably 3/4 of our previous clients would not have gone the passive route. That extra FSR that has been described up till now is really crucial. It is a small step, in our opinion, with how we see the urban fabric growing for the future. But even with these incentives, it's important to note that the massing and the morphology of the city really doesn't change very drastically. So on that side, it's a small action to the city, but it really is huge with respect to our climate goals. Today, you cannot separate energy efficiency from architecture and design. To do so is simply not socially responsible. We can easily achieve high energy standards for almost any style, but we need incentives to make this decision more economically viable. This is important so as not to lock in another 50 or 100 years of excessive energy consumption. Now, I'd like to speak towards the issue of character, heritage, and new construction. Staff, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's already a bonus FSR for retaining character homes in the RS zone. So we're already starting at a different, a non-level playing field when we're talking about demo or new construction. We have actually 2 character retention projects underway right now. This is one on Parker, in just off Commercial Drive. It's 1725 Parker. Now, this one is a character retention duplex, but did not go the certified passive house route, which for retention is the EnerFit program. And specifically, the reason why this one did not go that route is a lot of these homes are already non-compliant with regard to code, and some of those non-compliance issues are not relaxable. The one specifically for this project was projection into side yards. So we're already below the 1 meter projection into the side yard. we cannot thicken the walls beyond what they already are. And to reduce that area by thickening them to the interior of the house is simply not viable. And then with the FSR that we're already at, which is compliant per the zoning right now, we couldn't add any more to stretch the building. So there's no way for us to make up that lost FSR. So by upgrading this house, we've automatically reduced the livable area within for the tenants. So I can't blame them for not going EnerPhit. But if we had those incentives, that extra percentage would easily have swayed this client. And I will add that of our 10 or 12 projects within the city, there's a vast range of personalities that are involved. Some that come to us for passive house no matter what, they'll say at all costs, go for it. Some that don't know and are easily swayed. Some that don't care at all and still don't know what passive house is, but will do it because of the incentives. We don't care why they do it, we just want them to do it. So we'll take any reason to go that route. What happened here? Okay, so this is the same house that you can see is stilted now. And one thing to add about some comments that were, oh God, I'm at 5 minutes already? Jeez.
5 seconds left, yeah.
Okay.
But you do have a question from Councillor Swanson.
Okay.
It goes fast. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Swanson.
That went by fast.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So these passive houses that you're building,
Yes.
are they mostly strata or are some of them rental?
I've got everything in our office. We have everything from single family with secondary suite to multifamily and everything in between.
What would be the rents in the multifamily?
The multifamilies right now are only strata, yeah. We have rental in other cities, but not in Vancouver.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, and that's it for questions.
That's it. Okay.
Thank you very much for coming in. Council, that's it for registered speakers at this point. So I'll make a call. Does anybody else like to speak to this item? You'd like to call? I've got a second call. Anybody else like to come up and speak to this? Third and final call. Thanks very much then. So seeing there are no speakers, the speakers list is now closed. Received few or no public comments were received on this item after 5 p.m. today. So we should close the list of the receipt of public comments and move on to hearing closing comments. Staff have any closing comments they'd like to make? Okay, thanks. And it looks like we might have some questions for staff. Councillor Hardwick? Questions to staff?
I was actually going to move the motion,
Okay.
but I was before.
Well, it's your privilege. Yeah, you can move the motion.
Sorry. I'd like to move the motion, and I also have an amendment.
Okay, so you're going to move it with, you're going to move it with the, your added text?
Yes,
And the
please,
yellow
which
memo.
I circulated earlier.
Okay, thank you very much. And so we will move to the main queue now. You can do. If you put yourself on the queue.
Point of parliamentary.
Sure, Councillor Dejanova.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Understanding that we're in a quasi-judicial hearing, and I'm not concerned that I was on the queue first to move the motion, but I didn't hear Councillor Hardwick use the language of the yellow memo. So I wanted to make sure that we were moving this with the yellow memo. I seen these amendments yet, but I'm just wondering if for legal reasons, is there any reason this should come, an amendment should come after a motion at public hearing?
Sorry?
After the recommendations have been moved, then? Okay.
No, you can move a report with an additional item, and that's what's done here. And we've got a queue, and Councillor Hardwick, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So in addition to point A, and referring to Appendix A, adding on to page 2 of 5 there at 10.23.A point, in this case 6, that this not apply to heritage register homes or houses and qualified character homes as defined. And I think we heard clearly from staff and from also from people in the development community that there is a differentiation between character houses and that they should not all be treated the same. So I wanted to emphasize that. But that in every case, I think we agree that heritage should be specifically protected. And it's really a question of competing incentives here. We're trying to promote two things, and we're trying to find a win-win situation between them. So I'm a very enthusiastic supporter of the Passive House movement and what's being done with this memo. I just want to make sure that heritage and qualifying character is specifically respected.
Okay, thank you. So that's on the floor. And Councillor Dejanova, up to 5 minutes.
Thanks. I have a point of information through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff as to what because this is very legal. It's a bit different than interpretation here.
Sure, absolutely.
So thank you for indulging me with this point of information. What is a qualified character house? Because I don't see a specific policy named here. I was just wondering if qualified character house, because I looked it up in our city archives and looking through the development schedule. I don't see qualified character house as a schedule of development.
So are you looking for a...
I'm wondering how staff would interpret that, considering this is a formal text amendment.
Okay. Maybe we can start with the city manager.
Thanks. I'm not aware that there is a definition as outlined to your question.
Okay.
Can Shylin or Teresa, can you elaborate?
Thank you. Sorry, I just realized it's very formal and text amendments.
Sure.
That's the reason we're here tonight.
Is there a definition such as this? Character merit assessment? I don't believe that's the language that's in.
That's not the language that's in here.
I don't think.
Anyway, we'll just go.
Qualified is different
like
than I
to
think
know.
what's in there, which is character merit. Yeah.
We could take a pause if folks need a check.
Could I
Just 1 second.
move a recess, Mr. Mayor?
Just a second. Go ahead.
To answer your question regarding Heritage Register and qualified character, there is a formal definition, of course, of the Heritage Register because council must approve any addition or deletion from the Heritage Register. Qualified character does not have a formal definition in the sense, so I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So I appreciate that. And for that reason, Mr. Mayor, because I was trying to look up qualified character home, I would ask you to maybe consider a ruling on this amendment. Okay. Just maybe, I'm happy to call a recess if you need to consider.
No, that's okay. I'll just step out for a second, but I will pause your timer, and you have 2.5 minutes left, but I'll talk to, if I could talk to the city manager, perhaps the clerk. Okay, we have checked with legal. Oh, I have to wait for quorum. Yeah, I have checked with legal, and they suggest this is out of order because again, this is a we are amending a law as opposed to a motion where there's interpretation, and so I will abide by that ruling and rule that this this clause is not in order, but I'm not quite sure what we do with that, and I'll be right back with you. Because the entire motion was moved with additional language that is out of order, then the entire motion is out of order, as per usual. It just seems to be longer than usual and is the staff report. So the whole thing's out of order, and we don't actually have anything on the floor. Okay.
Thank you. I'm still in the queue, am I?
You are?
May I move the recommendations with the yellow memo?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Do we have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Boyle. So we're right, and that's where we are.
I'd be happy to speak to this. I spent a long time here, as did Councillor Carr, when we went through the HRA in Shaughnessy, and there were individuals who showed us photos and begged staff to consider what a character home was. I know that staff have embarked on this journey many times, and I think that for that reason they do assessments individually and carefully of that, because it's very hard to define, and we really wouldn't want any unintended consequences, any architecturally meritorious homes to be demolished. But at the same time, there are homes on the Heritage Register that maybe also needed to be reviewed at that time. I'm speaking to this recommendation considering the fact that the previous recommendation was out of order, that was tabled, and I think that staff have really been very thoughtful with this in working through how we're best going to see Passive House achieved in the city of Vancouver. And what I'm hearing from some of the speakers also, and those with expertise and industry experience, is that this not only will make it easier to build Passive House, but perhaps there's the option eventually that this will be a springboard for laneway homes, where character homes also can coexist. So I think that it's really important that we remember that this is one step. This is a text amendment, and it doesn't mean that others won't come after it. It doesn't mean that we don't deal with heritage or character homes in other ways. But for that reason, I certainly will be supporting the staff recommendations with the yellow memo as they currently are.
Thanks very much. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks, and I'll also be supporting these amendments, and will be brief just to say I really appreciate the balancing and weaving together of these various priorities, and helping us understand how they layer on top of each other and shape the type of city that we grow into. And I also think it's really important to recognize that the housing that we're building or retrofitting and repairing now is the housing that our residents will live in for 20 and 50 years. These are homes that we need to have be carbon neutral as soon as possible. 10 years ago, but now is as best we can do at this point. And so it's critical that we figure out how as many of the projects that are being built now as possible can be Passive House, and that we keep moving those incentives forward so that we are addressing this issue as quickly as we can and decreasing the emissions that our buildings produce. So very happy to see this and very happy to support it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hardwick, up to 5 minutes.
Again, I would like to look at bringing back an amendment.
It's your privilege.
And as I'm just having some technical difficulties, if I could remove the reference to character homes and just put heritage.
Submitted in writing. Again, this is a quasi-judicial hearing, so it's not like a regular council meeting. So I was mistaken. Actually, you have about 3 minutes left. I could move on to the next speaker and then put you back on the end of the list if you like.
Yes, please, I'll pass.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr, up to 5 minutes.
Right, thank you. So I'm going to speak to the motion as it is on the floor, and say that clearly, for me, it's important to have both more passive homes in this city, and it is also important for me to see character homes and heritage homes retained more in this city. In terms of this particular proposal in front of us, or application in front of us to change regulations, the issue for me is, will these incentives lead to more of the character or heritage homes being replaced? And so I go back to some of the numbers, and that we're losing a lot of character homes in this city. I think the last time that I checked, it was like one a day. And yet, there's somewhere, staff said between 1 and 10. I mean, we've had 10 applications, but not that many have been built. So there's very few of these homes anywhere in the city. And I didn't ask the question, but I'm assuming that not all of those, or even if it's the maximum of 10 or 4 or even 1, are not on lots that have character or heritage homes. I'm not quite sure, but there's very, very few. So for me, there's a real advantage in moving forward with these, because I believe there is a greater good in terms of what it's achieving, in terms of the kinds of homes we need to move forward with altogether. That is not to say I don't believe that there is merit in us looking as a council back at the incentives for retaining character homes and heritage homes, but particularly character homes in this city. I agree entirely with the speaker, Mr. Davidson, who said that the character home retention policies are fundamentally flawed and need to be fixed. Those are my words exactly. I totally agree with that. We failed as a council previously to develop enough incentives in terms of a differential between tear down and new build and retention and keep the character home to enable people to make that choice to retain, like the RT7 and RT8 zoning did in Kitsilano. And I would love to see us, I mean, I've actually asked for it, but maybe we'll have to push even harder to get another look at that character home retention. So meanwhile, for me, on this particular case, if we, 56% of our emissions in the city of greenhouse gas emissions are from buildings. So we need to get our buildings to zero emission buildings, passive house homes, get us there. So I want to see these incentives move forward, and I want to see us pursue as a council, outside of this public hearing, move on better retention incentives for character homes.
Thank you. Councillor DeGenova?
I just wanted to close, Mr. Mayor, as I move the motion.
You have yourself on the
I
list.
didn't see
I mean, you
anyone
have
else
the
on-
floor, but
Thank you.
Councillor Hardwick.
Oh, I will, oh. All right, I'll allow Councillor Hardwick, or I would ask you to allow Councillor Hardwick to go
Okay,
first.
you're going to cede the floor to Councillor Hardwick. Sure, go ahead, Councillor Hardwick.
Thank you. I thought I'd take another stab at this amendment, focusing specifically on houses covered under the Heritage Register. Minimally, I would like to make sure that those are specifically protected.
Wait 1 second. Yep, just reading the amendment here. Okay, we have a point of order, Councillor DeGenova. Sure. Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I assumed that the register meant that they couldn't be torn down to build a passive home. Is that correct? Because right now it says passive house does not apply on properties. So would that then mean that it's the entire property? So if there was infill or laneway home, I need that answered, because I feel that the my point of order is the Heritage Register already defines protected properties. So I don't know how we could build a passive home in place of that. So I'm kind of confused by this.
A point of order is that there's a precedent
Yes.
that's being broken, so is it?
And that is the precedence being broken. I understand that this is redundant because the Heritage Register
You're asking for
already.
A ruling on the,
My apologies. It's been a long day. So
okay.
a ruling on that.
Okay, so we need a ruling on this one, and I will stop your timer, Councillor Hardwick, and I will talk with the clerk and city manager. Okay, it does look like this isn't redundant because we haven't passed something similar, but we did check further, and it's not out of order either. So it's on the floor. So Councillor Hardwick, you still have the floor. You want to speak to it?
I'd just like to be clear that my objective with this amendment is not to constrain the opportunities for passive home development at all, but rather to find a way for a win-win. As Councillor Carr quite eloquently described just now, we have more about character houses, but minimally on the Heritage Register, we have such a limited number that are still there. There's nothing preventing laneway houses or other forms that are, involve retention as part of the redevelopment. So I'm just trying to find a win-win that serves both sides, and I think this accomplishes it.
Okay, thanks. So we have an amendment queue. We need somebody to second this. Okie doke. So now we're on the amendment queue. I think it's clear now. Does anybody want to speak to that? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I just have a point of information through you to staff, and I'm really sorry. I was hoping not to have to do this, but hearing Councillor Hardwick's comments about, and I think I want some of the same things, but the language here is the whole property. So technically, you could have a character home and have nothing right now on the back of that and build a laneway house that's passive, but now this says property. So, you couldn't have character, you could have a home on the Heritage Register that was allowed to have infill on it, and you could not build passive house on that land. That's my question. Is that how staff would interpret this? If a laneway policy came after this, it would not apply to this. May I ask that question?
Perhaps, manager, point of information, perhaps we could steer it over to your crew over there.
So staff have conferred based on that comment, and the way it's worded now, implies, and we would have to confirm with law to be sure, but it implies that the whole property would be stricken from taking advantage of this. So if somebody wanted to build a laneway house on the back of the lot, they would not be able to get the incentive if they wanted to do it to a passive house standard. Or another building, not necessarily laneway. But if it was amended to say the building as opposed to the property, that would then focus just on the building.
Councillor Dejanova still
Thank
has
you
the
very
floor.
much. I'm going to take myself off the list in just a moment, but I'm going to say that if it was amended to say that, I'd be supportive of that. I just don't think we need to include the whole property in that. I think that ties the hands of some of these owners of these properties that are on our register that may want to consider this, and it may be the difference for them between keeping their home or not, or selling that, or doing something else. So I think we have to consider the unintended consequences, and I don't see anything about this in the public consultation. So I'd be comfortable if it said the property, as staff had said, but I mean, I don't mean to nitpick here, but I really would hope, Councillor Hardwick, that you would try again and maybe amend your own amendment, and I could support that. So I'll take myself off the queue. Just wanted to state.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dominato.
My question's been answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hardwick. Yes. City Manager, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Through the mayor, if I might. Also, if you're going to be making changes, Councillor Hardwick, law has suggested that we change the word "on" to the word "to." Thank you.
So how about 2 buildings listed on the Heritage Register? I think that's what you're saying, on buildings?
Yep.
As opposed to.
I'm sorry. I think it's I
two.
think you're on the wrong "to."
Okay.
And not apply to buildings, I think is the what you're suggesting, right? Yep.
Can you highlight the change? So I take it, Councillor Hardwick, you're suggesting an amendment to your
Yes,
amendment?
the amendment, and I take the city manager's note there. But I think the key thing was the replacement of the word buildings instead of properties.
Right. So if you, clerk, could also highlight that. That's right. I mean, that would now be buildings. Okay. So do we have a...
And a good point, Councillor Fry, that the term building should be used in both places. Where it says houses, those houses should also be buildings.
So is that your complete amendment then?
Yes, I
Okay,
apologize for...
No problem. We're on the amendment for Amendment Q. Would anybody like to speak to this? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a point of information through you to staff. I'm wondering if staff can refresh my memory on under what circumstances can a home on the Heritage Register be replaced by a new build of any kind?
Hugh McLean, Planning and Development. A building that's on the register is not protected, it's simply listed, so it can be replaced, it can be demolished, provided that all other permits are in place. That's how the Vancouver Charter describes it. So a building can be replaced. The condition is typically the Director of Planning will not consider any conditional provisions if the building on the register is lost. It can only achieve the outright provisions of the zoning.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff again. So the issue here is that there would be no extra density if a heritage home was torn down and replaced by a regular home. But if it was to be replaced by a passive house home, there would be extra density that would be allowed in a new build. That's what is at play here. Is that right?
Well, my understanding is that depending if this extra density is considered conditional, then we do not, Director of Planning does not allow for the conditional provisions to be considered.
So it couldn't anyway then? A passive house could not be? I'm sorry, I don't understand that. So because a passive house has got conditional density, according to the proposal that's in front of us now, if that amendment were not to take place, even if that amendment were not to take place, and somebody applied for the building of a passive home, if it was to replace a heritage home, it could not have any extra density that we would normally give a passive house. It's just because it is already.
That is my understanding, because the objective is to retain all buildings on the register and use incentives to have those buildings retained.
Got it. All right. So that's okay. That's
and the demolition permit, to clarify, that's issued by the Director of Planning.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else to add?
Yes, I do have another comment to add then, and that is that this is, it doesn't seem reasonable to me that we as a council would say that we don't want a heritage home to be replaced by a passive home compared to being replaced by any other home. So this would prejudice the market to deliver the building of a new non-passive home on a heritage home lot if it was approved to be done that way. I mean, there's still some protections for heritage homes, but it's not fully protected. So, and the character home incentives, which might lead some to think, oh, we don't want to allow character homes because there's even more of an incentive to tear down a heritage home, don't appear, from what I've heard from staff, to apply. So, in other words, there's no extra incentive to knock down a heritage home and replace it with a passive home. And if somebody was going to knock down a heritage home, they could just do a regular home and there'd be no incentives for them to put up a passive home. So I cannot see the value in this.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I will just echo what Councillor Carr has said, that it's not clear to me that this makes any significant difference, and so I won't be supporting. I'm indifferent to the amendment to change it to buildings, because I won't be supporting the first level amendment.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Weeb.
I as well, I understand the direction of preserving heritage homes, and I'm very supportive. However, here, I think that there is good retention if we're doing passive house retrofits or onto these buildings, so there's incentives in that sense. If it pulls off the registry, I would like to see it be a passive house. I know they don't get the incentives because it's on the registry, so I think this is, to Carr's point, is actually against it. So I'll be voting against this, and I do hope that we do get the heritage and character home policy back sooner than later, because it is something that's been brought up multiple times at public hearings.
Thanks very much, Councillor Nova.
I urge Councillor Hardwick to I would hope Councillor Hardwick might withdraw this amendment to her amendment and then further her amendment. The reason for this is I was trying to find a middle ground, because I do, as others have stated, support heritage homes, but the fact is that that's a completely different matter. That's a different public hearing. That's like saying here, right now, that we're not going to, when we talk about green demolition, we're not going to do that because that would mean demolishing possibly a home on the heritage register. So we don't say no to green demolition because we don't want homes to be demolished, and then people demolish the way that they did before we had green demolition. So I think that, Councillor Hardwick, I take your point. I understand it. I tried to help, but I can't support it the way it is. I would hope you would withdraw it, because I understand what you're trying to achieve, but I don't think it's here that you would achieve that. I think it's at a council meeting where you'd bring a motion and put some direction forward to staff. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hardwick.
And my interpretation is different than what is being expressed here, but in the interest of moving this forward and in the interest of revisiting it in a more complete way, I will withdraw the amendment as suggested. But I do want to be clear about this, that the objection is to have competing incentives. And I don't want one to trump the other, so to speak. And that was the intention here, is that as much as we want to foster the development of passive homes, we don't want to do it at the expense of Heritage Register buildings.
Thanks so much. So what we need to do then is to withdraw your amendment to your amendment and then withdraw your amendment. So, okay, so you have to move a motion to...
I move a motion to withdraw the amendment to the amendment.
Okay, we have a seconder for that? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? So
and then
withdrawn.
I reckon the amendment.
That's right, so we'll do the same. Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that's done too, so we'll go back to the main queue. Councillor Hardwick, anything else?
No, that was interesting, but thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Dejanova, you...
Thanks very much. Just to close on the motion, I really appreciate the work that staff have put into this. Appreciate the speakers coming out and sharing the insight with us about how Passive House can be done differently and better. And thanks for the information on character homes and the HRA as well, the Heritage Registry that we have at the City of Vancouver here. I predict that there may be some motions coming forward on that, but I really want to focus on what we have in front of us, which really will incentivize passive homes in the City of Vancouver. And although I asked about accessibility, I don't feel that it needs to be put in this specific recommendation with the yellow memo. I'm confident that staff will consider that, as they are on a completely different, streamline of accessibility and accessible path. And I know that the intention was to bring something back to council eventually on that, and I trust that our staff will do that. So for that reason, I am wholeheartedly support this, but my support for this doesn't mean that I don't support heritage in our city. It's simply they're two different policies, and as we just saw, they intertwine in ways that perhaps at the end of the day can be frustrating to those people who really are trying to not only follow our rules and guidelines here in the City of Vancouver, but to make sure that we make sense of these policies. I think that it's really great to have that extra, to have the extra insight of individuals in the community who've done this themselves. So for that reason, I support staff's recommendations and want to thank you for what you've brought forward, including the yellow memo.
Thank you. So that's it for speakers. So we can call a vote on this report. Councillor Dejanova. Oh, there you go. Councillor Dominato, Councillor Kirby-Young. And that has passed unanimously. Thanks very much, Council. Thanks very much, staff and speakers. Okay, so next is Heritage on Commercial Street. We do not have speakers, so we could waive the presentation. We have Hugh McLean here, I think. Gotta raise up that, we raise up the desk there, clerks. Thank you. Hey, there's any, I'm just gonna check with council. Does anybody like to see the presentation? So we would like to see the presentation if that's possible, but we're going to read the application first.
This is an application by the General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability to add the existing building at 3495-3505 Commercial Street, known as the Broadhurst and Whitaker Block, to the Vancouver Heritage Register in the C evaluation category, and to designate the exterior and structure of the existing building to secure the long-term protection of the heritage property from inappropriate alterations and demolition. No correspondence has been received on this application since it was scheduled for public hearing and prior to the close of the speakers list and receipt of public comments. This represents all correspondence received up to 5 p.m. today.
Thanks very much. And so we can walk through the presentation. That would be great. I got a mic problem here. There we go. Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The item for your approval at this public hearing is the addition of the building at 3495 to 3505 Commercial Street to the Vancouver Heritage Register as a C listing, and the Heritage Designation Bylaw to protect its exterior and structure. The proposal includes adding a floor to the top of the Heritage Building, which will be recessed from the front, and to construct a 4-story infill building at the rear. The Heritage Building will accommodate 4 street-level commercial units. The upper floors, along with the infill, will accommodate 18 residential units, 4 of which are to be rental. As part of the development permit application, the applicant is seeking a modest amount of residential floor area, which is 8% beyond permitted, and that is to be assigned to common circulation areas such as corridors and balconies. The other relaxations sought as part of the development permit are on-site parking and rear yard setback for the proposed infill building. There is a high degree of retention, and the project is in line with accepted standards and guidelines for heritage conservation. The Director of Planning is seeking Council's approval of the addition to the Heritage Register and approval of the Heritage Designation Bylaw as a condition of the development permit. I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Okay, and do we have the applicant team here? There you are. Thanks very much. Let's see, did you want to speak to the application at all? Perfect. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. And I've got Councillor Swanson on the queue to ask questions.
So there's 4 rental units and 14 strata proposed plus some commercial, is that right?
That's right.
Do we have any idea what the rents will be?
No, I don't know what the rents will be.
There's no limits on them or anything?
No.
And are there any community CACs or DCLs being paid?
Yes, DCLs are collected as part of the development permit application for all the new floor area, both commercial and residential.
But no CACs?
No, just DCLs.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And that is it for questions. Councillor Kirby-Young, go ahead.
Thank you. I just had a quick one, and I realized that this is not sort of an application for the heritage designation, but I'm just wondering why the report doesn't specifically list the applicant. I know that our information sheet does tonight, but we typically get that listed on the rezoning applications. Why is that?
Typically with heritage applications, we haven't listed them. We haven't been asked to provide that information.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. I was just curious because we get, just in terms of consistency, or I wonder if there's any reason or transparency, like we get it on an info sheet but not on the public document. Okay. And the parking is going to be underground in the infill building, or where's the parking located with the setback all the way to the lane? I just wanted to clarify. I wasn't clear on that.
Parking, Marianne, details just about design of the parking. It's at grade. Yes.
It's at grade?
Yes.
So where is it if that 25 feet or whatever, if the building's going all the way back with that relaxation? I was just trying to kind of contextually place it.
Hi, Mariana Modillo. I'm the architect for this project. So the parking is in the infill building at the lane at below the level of the residential floor. So there's a podium level that's got a deck.
Oh, okay.
And then above that is the residential. So below that podium is all the parking, including car share.
Okay, and there's the 4 floors then. Is the 4 floors of residential in addition to the
No,
podium?
it's
one of the 4.
Yeah, it's one of the 4.
Okay. And it also referenced that they're highly livable units in size. Does that mean larger?
They range in size. So we've got a diversity of unit mix, and livability to us doesn't necessarily relate to square footage, but it relates to good design. All of the units are through units, so they have access to fresh air and daylight from both ends, not just one. They all have access to the shared common courtyard. And I think they're all pretty good sizes. Like we don't have anything micro, but the units in the Heritage Building run from about 500 to 600 square feet. And that's due to the heritage retention.
Okay, and then one additional question, if I can, just a quick one, is so I'm having trouble containing my enthusiasm for this project. So I think it's beautiful.
Thanks.
What's the character going to be of the infill units? Going to mimic some of the character? Are they going to be more modern?
It is a modern approach that's reflective of the surrounding context, which is amazing. Commercial Street is such a rich and diverse part of our city that benefits from sort of its mix of industrial and residential. So there's a lot of industrial use of concrete blocks. So we're using a brick sort of sized block that is reflective of the surrounding context. We also have small touches that reflect the Heritage Building, and the Heritage Building will be completely restored to its original condition.
Okay, amazing. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Just before we move on to Councillor Wiebe, just to remind folks that we're just looking at the heritage designation here. We're not doing on the approval of the building. That's correct?
That's correct.
Right. So it's a more limited kind of consideration tonight. But with that in mind, on to Councillor Wiebe.
It talks about the Heritage Registry C. I'm wondering how close was it to moving up to Registry B, or is only C for facades?
No, it's not C for facades. It's simply a number of criteria that come together, which would be architectural, historical, cultural, and the context which the building is within, plus its integrity. And all those come together in a score which will rank it either an A, B, or C. So it was fairly close to being a B, I think, when the evaluation was done, but it was still the high C listing.
Okay, and how is the inappropriate alterations reviewed? Is that done by city staff, right? Because it talks about it won't allow the property to have inappropriate alterations. So is that if the property owner wants to make alterations in the future, there's a covenant to not touch the facade, or how is that monitored and enforced?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, as with any designated protected heritage building, a heritage alteration permit is required for any future alterations. So it doesn't mean the exterior can't be touched. It simply means that changes will need to be made in a way that are compatible with the character. So certain materials will not be appropriate, whereas others would be. Wood windows as opposed to vinyl windows. If the cladding had to be repaired, for instance, we wouldn't seek its removal in whole unless there were a structural reason for it. We would look at cladding that were compatible, same material, and typically wood cladding.
Okay, and I guess question to the proponent, was the process of going for Heritage C something that you were looking at on the onset of this project? And or were there elements that you weren't able to save because it was more difficult or less difficult in the actual process to deal with it?
So I just want to be clear that the proposal is for the full retention of the entire building. It's not for just the facade retention.
Okay.
And the owner came with us with the intent to retain the existing building.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle.
Thanks, and I'm actually not sure who this is a question to, but I'm wondering the small businesses that are currently in those buildings will stay, or unclear?
Currently, I've been advised by the architect that there are no businesses in those units right now, so they'll be seeking new commercial businesses to fill the 4 units.
Okay, so it's not where the Commercial Street Cafe is, it's just over from there?
It's just from the one at further to the south.
I'll Google map it. Sorry, I was picturing, I guess, this.
There is one at the corner of
building.
22nd,
Yes.
if that's
Yeah.
the one. Yes, that was designated a few years ago.
Okay.
About 10 years ago, I believe.
Okay, great. Okay, that's all. Thanks for helping me place myself in that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Dejanova.
I was prepared to move the motion.
We have Councillor Kirby-Young on the list.
Councilor Kirby-Young, do you have a question? Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm happy to move the motions
Okay, thank you.
or move the staff recommendations in a motion. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And
But we didn't, sorry, I didn't call for public yet.
oh, my apologies. So sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, right. So any other questions from, nope, or for the applicant? Nope. Okay, thanks. So there's nobody on the formal speakers list, but I will call 3 times. Did anybody else like to speak to this, or anybody like to speak to this? Heritage designation? Going twice? Going 3 times. Okay, thanks. So there are no speakers. The speakers list is now closed. There's no public comments. So we'll close the receipt of these and then ask if, does the applicant have any closing comments? Thank you. Staff? Okay, we're going to get you to a limbo there. Council have any questions? We have Councillor Kirby-Young. Did you have questions or no? Okay, thank you. So now we can move. Okay. Oh, sorry. I saw Councillor Kirby-Young was, who's going to, somebody just, okay, you're going to move it, Councillor? Is that good? Okay, thanks. There we go. Any debate? Anybody want to debate this? Okay, please put yourself on the list and away you go.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to see a project like this come forward. It was actually really exciting reading the other night. Not that public hearing reading isn't always, but the retention of, I was actually on this block, and I went to job fair and I stopped for a cup of coffee and I actually wandered down this couple of blocks and I thought, wow, it would be so amazing to see this restored. And it is looking run down and dingy, but it looks a little bit like an old movie set that's just waiting to be brought back to life, and to sort of see some of the description of the features, such as the bay windows, the Edwardian era, and the parapets, and here the rear veranda on the second story with the open wooden balustrade, I think is magical, and I think we want to be applauding people that are willing to bring forward and support the Heritage Register, but look at innovative use in conjunction with bringing life in with both residential and commercial. So I'm really excited to see the revitalization of this area and this block, and I hope this engenders some similar applications in the area, because it is a really creative and sort of character-filled part of the city, right, in terms of the feeling that it evokes. So I just want to say this is a really exciting project to get amidst some of the more cookie-cutter ones that we see, and I appreciate the thinking behind it, and I'm fully supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Swanson?
Yeah, I don't hate heritage, but it really bugs me that virtually all of the housing that we're approving is for pretty people that have fairly high incomes. Like not even one cheap unit in this building or in this project. So I think that's a problem that I think this council has to deal with, that all of these projects that we're approving are for housing that's for people at the high income end.
Okay, thank you. I just remind council that this is just the heritage designation on this building, so that's we're not approving any other change. Councillor Dejanova?
I wasn't going to say anything, but I thought that maybe I'd leave it on a friendly note, that I appreciate the work that our staff have done on this. I appreciate the applicant's explanation. I live in East Van. I think this is a really cool project, and also in the reading about it, and really think that this just goes to show in some of my earlier comments, what you can do with heritage. So I think that's it certainly. It certainly was something that was interesting for me to see. That being said, we haven't had any speakers, and I keep an open mind until we debate and decide here. So I certainly do support this, and I think that it's important that we remember that we need people of all incomes in this city, because that's how we also get our tax base. And without a tax base and without housing for all people, then we can't support those who are sometimes less fortunate. So I think that it's important that we also remember that, Vancouver needs to be a city for everyone, for families, for people who live at shelter rates and the hills limits, but also people who can afford market rent, who inject new life into our economy, into small business in Vancouver. And I know that this area is certainly an area that has that spirit of local community. So for that reason, I just wanted to say that I really do support this, and I'll leave my comments at that.
Thanks. If I can just turn the chair over to Councillor Dominato for a second. While this might make Councillor Swanson feel better, this was COPE's headquarters for a very long time under Larry Campbell and Think City. So there's a lot of political activity that's happened in that building, and I'm sure there will be more activities, perhaps not so nefarious, but but that's where the last Olympics were approved, I think, in there. So. Who knows what will happen next? Okay, thanks so much, and now I'll take the chair back if you don't mind. Okay, right, so we can call a vote on this one? Councillor Carr, Councillor Swanson. Just waiting for Councillor Swanson. Okay, so that's passed with none in opposition. Thank you very much, Council. On to the text amendment for 1500 West Georgia Street. I'll just read the application, summary correspondence, and then we'll get underway.
This is an application by the Bosa Properties Incorporated to amend CD1 705 to increase a permitted floor space ratio, FSR, from 10.82 to 10.93, and to increase the maximum floor area of sub-area A by 432.2 square meters, equivalent of 4,652.2 square feet, to correct an error in the floor area calculation for the existing retained office building. No correspondence has been received on this application since it was referred to public hearing and prior to the close of the speakers list and receipt of public comments. This represents all correspondence received up to 5 p.m. today.
Thanks very much. We have Michael Naylor here from the Rezoning Center, and there's no staff presentation for this item, but here to answer questions, I imagine. And I don't think there's an applicant team. Is the applicant team here? There is. Okay, great. Did you wish to speak to the application or just answer questions? Thank you very much. Okay, so any questions from council to staff or the applicant? I don't see anybody there. We don't have any speakers, I don't think. Don't have any speakers, so Councillor DeGenova? Okay. So I'm going to make a public call. If anybody in the audience would like to speak to this item, now's your chance. Going twice. Third time. Thanks very much. So there's no speakers. The speakers list is now closed, and we won't receive any more public correspondence because we haven't had any since 5. And we'll close the list. So any closing comments by the applicant? Nope. Thanks. Staff, any closing comments? Nope. Okay. So, Councillor DeGenova, I take it you're going to move the motion?
I'm happy to move this, Mr. Mayor, and it simply is a text amendment. So there isn't very much that I will say to it other than I will be supporting this, and in the interest of keeping it short, that's all I'll say.
Okay, thanks. Do you have a seconder? Thanks very much. So, does anybody want to speak to this at all? If not, then we'll call a vote. Councillor Weeb and Councillor Kirby Young? That's right. That's unanimous. Thanks very much, Council. And now we're on to the next item, rezoning on Clive Avenue. If we can get the clerk to Read out the application.
This is an application by DYS Architecture to rezone 3235-3261 Clive Avenue from CD1 Comprehensive Development District 219 to the new CD1 Comprehensive Development District to permit the development of a 6-story residential building fronting Vanessa Avenue and 3.5-story townhouses fronting Clive Avenue with 68 residential units, 62 strata titled units, and 6 market rental units, increases to the permitted floor space ratio, FSR, from 1.20 to 2.25, and to the maximum building height from 11.9 meters, equivalent of 39 feet, to 21.4 meters, equivalent of 70.2 feet, are proposed. The following correspondence has been received since referral to public hearing and prior to the close of the speakers list and receipt of public comments. 1 pieces of correspondence in support, 1 piece of correspondence in opposition, and 1 piece of correspondence dealing with other aspects of the application. This represents all correspondence received up to 5 p.m. today.
Thanks very much. And we have Michelle Yip here from the Rezoning Center. But we have no speakers, so we might want to waive the presentation unless, does anybody want to see the presentation? Okay.
Happy to waive.
Thanks very much. So we'll waive the presentation of the applicant team here to speak to the applicant team. You don't have to speak, just if you'd like to, you can, or just answer questions. That's great. Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from council to staff or the applicant? This is your chance to ask the applicant questions. I don't see anybody on the queue. Okay, we have nobody on the formally on the list, so I'll call to the public. Is there anybody who'd like to speak to this rezoning application? Going twice. One last call. Okay, thanks very much. So we're going to, we haven't received any correspondence after 5 p.m., so we'll close the receipt of public comments and move on to hearing closing comments. Does the applicant have any closing comments? Closing comments? Okay, nice to hear. Thank you. Staff have any closing comments? Nope, thank you. Council have any questions? I got Councillor Dejanova. Question?
I do have a question for staff. And it's specifically on looking at the way that this project has been structured with affordability. And in the report, I understand that there are townhomes included, which meets the policy and several policies in the plan. However, I was wondering if staff could elaborate on what it would do if council perhaps were to put specific regulations on the types of rents that were charged here at this building, if the pro forma would still work and if that would be workable for the applicant in your conversations with the applicant.
I think the applicant should be able to answer that question in terms of their
A little
pro
late for
forma.
that. So we've closed. We can't hear from the applicant now. So it's just
No, I asked staff in their conversations with the applicant.
okay.
That's
and
what I
the
said.
response.
So, yes, and
Yeah.
that's why I said in your conversations with the applicant. My apologies,
That's
Mr.
okay.
Mayor, that I wasn't clear.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't a conversation that we had. Real estate has reviewed the pro forma, and there was fairly, from the understanding that I've had in terms of their negotiations with real estate, it was a fairly tight pro forma in terms of the lift. And there is a CAC being produced on this, being achieved on this at 1.2 million, which is,
Okay, so so would there be a concern that this would undermine the family housing that would be built in much needed townhome stock in our city if the mix of how the affordability of the units structured was changed?
Yes, I believe there would be. If there was if the affordability structure, there was an imposition in terms of providing a particular rental rate I think there would be implications and impacts to the project overall.
Would that be the same for income?
I believe so.
Okay, that's good to know. Also had a question on overall, is this one of the more affordable neighborhoods in Vancouver? Would we, can staff answer that question? Just on a land economics standpoint, that's what I'm looking at.
It's a tough one. When we initially did the Joyce Collingwood plan, it was seen as an area that had more affordable housing stock. I did a cursory review today, though, of housing prices as well as rental rates, and they are quite high as well, actually.
Comparatively to other areas of Vancouver, would you say it ranks on the lower end of
I would say it's actually the equivalent. It does range. There's a huge range in terms of the housing stock in terms of age, and then the age is reflective of certain pricing. So there's a large range in terms of the pricing. So I should say a 26-year-old condo, in terms of pricing, it was going as low as $460,000 to a 2-year-old build at $850,000. And then the rental rates ranging from $1,700 to $2,400.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Swanson.
I have an amendment, but I don't think this is the time, right?
Yep, still not quite there yet. We haven't got the motion moved yet, so you'd have to wait for that period. Okay, thanks, Councillor Dominato. Questions to staff?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on page 10 of the report. Just noticing the initial submission was 100% strata units, and then it was revised to include 6 units of rental. Was that something that was encouraged through our conversations with city staff to achieve more rental stock, or was that something that came forward from the applicant? I'm just curious about
It was something that the city had initiated in terms of the conversation through the review of the processing of the application. It was realized that the rental housing stock ODP did apply to this site as a CD1 zone site. And so we had altered the application to advise the applicant that the 1-to-1 replacement ratio would be required.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. Councillor Genova, any more questions?
I was happy to move the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
The staff recommendations as proposed.
Great, thank you. And seconder? Great, anything else to say? You've got to move on. Sorry, I'm just going to move to the main queue. And I'll let people load up on the main queue there. Thanks. Okay.
Thanks so much, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to support this, and I remember when the plan was approved here in the previous term of council. I feel that not only is this one of the more affordable areas in Vancouver to live, but this will provide much needed housing stock, rental housing stock in the area, and as well as I think that we're going to see different types of housing that come to us depending on the zoning and the plan. That being said, any questions that I had were answered very, very well above what I even expected by staff as to the fact that there is a CAC and that has tightened up where we're at with the pro forma. That being said, I also understand that it's something that we need to consider when we look at the different types of housing. And as I just spoke to in a previous motion, we need all different types of housing, and that helps us to support our models throughout the city of Vancouver. So for that reason, and the fact that there are some townhomes also included, and we're seeing less and less of those applications in the city of Vancouver, I will be supporting this.
Thank you. Councillor Swanson?
Yeah, I sent an amendment, basically just adding another letter further that the approvals be subject to the CAC revenue from the project being used to increase affordability of social housing for households with under 50,000 K in that neighborhood. So there's a really good chart on page 10 that has what some of the incomes are of people in the neighborhood. The median household income of a renter household is less than 50,000. So half of renters have less than 50,000 renter households, and the median income for a single person is 30,000. So there's obviously harsh need for affordable housing for people under 50, and I thought maybe this would be a way to throw some money in and see if we could get it somewhere in the neighborhood at least.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Swanson. I'm just going to stop your timer here. I'm going to check. I believe this is out of order, but I'm going to check with the planners and get right back to you. My suspicion is that we can't just change the policy right at the end of an application, so I'll come right back. Okay, Councillor Swanson, after conferring, this is in order, and so we're fine to move ahead with it if it's seconded. So I don't hear a seconder, so we're going to move on. Councillor Swanson, do you have anything else? Sorry, I'm just checking on the mics.
Mic?
There we go. Yeah, go ahead.
And only be for people at Hills. So out of 1,400 units, we get 30 for people at Hills, 30 for people at 50,000 or under. It's not a very good ratio. It's especially not a very good ratio for a neighborhood where the median household income is 50,000, and we as a council need to do something about this. So somebody please tell me how. If you won't second a motion like this, I don't know what we can do.
On to Councillor Kirby-Yung.
I was on previously for a point of order, but we've dealt with that. And I do note that we had a previously similar amendment, but I think at the time on a previous hearing it was ruled out of order because, I'll just provide this comment from my own perspective, because we have an existing CAC policy that allocates how and where CACs are applied. However, I'll speak to the main project, and I am supportive of this one. I think that it does provide some unique housing. I appreciate the fact that there's the combination with the market rental units so that we have replacement of those. And I think it does provide some residential units in an attractive design in a great neighborhood. So I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dominato.
Sorry, it's a holdover for a point of information.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr.
Yes, I was prepared actually to comment on the amendment that was not seconded, and the reason I had an actual, I would have, but I had a question about it. Nonetheless, we've moved beyond that, and
If it makes everybody feel better, I subsequently have had a note from legal saying it isn't in order. So I had moved ahead without getting a full legal comment, and now we've got it back, so it was out of order.
That's good information.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. But I really feel that number one, this is a project I've seen lots of over the last number of years. Although normally the 6-story residential buildings that are strata don't necessarily come with market rentals, so this is a rarer form to have some market rental, and I think it's a good idea to introduce as much market rental as we can. I'm under no delusion that it will be in the affordable range. It'll probably be at market rates, but nonetheless, it is a step in the right direction. Though I think it's really important for us as a council to really look at, where do CACs go from development such as this, so as we go through the public hearing process. And normally, when a development occurs within a neighborhood that has any kind of a plan that has a public benefit strategy, it's the public benefit strategy associated with that local area plan that directs where the CACs go. That's a public process. That's where people have been involved over sometimes many years in terms of determining those priorities. So, I am hesitant to redirect money that's not in line with what the residents have already determined are their priorities for their particular area. Notwithstanding that, I see the point that, and I'm compassionate around the point that is raised by Councillor Swanson in terms of real affordability, and the way in which I believe we need to move forward on that is with our Housing Vancouver strategy. And there is an opportunity this fall to really take a look, and we've asked staff to take a look at those figures being more clearly matched to the real needs of different income levels within the city. That was done at the rental housing and incentives review in the fall. So I'm hopeful that we actually will get some different targets out of that kind of process.
Thanks very much, Councillor Ajanova.
I was just going to wrap up to say that I too was going to call a point of order because I wasn't sure if CACs could be used on operational expenses like rents, which I understood that to be the deepening of affordability, but we don't need to worry about that anymore. I too, and that's what I mentioned to Councillor Carr's point, the community spoke very clearly about what they wanted. This was a unique plan, and now we're seeing projects come from that plan where the CACs are being allocated as per the community's wishes. And I think that's certainly something we've heard loud and clear from the community. That being said, as I said, we need all different types of housing in the city of Vancouver, and I think it's incumbent upon us to try our very best to make sure that we're doing what we can, not only for market rental, but for housing at the hills limits, for housing in our MERP projects, or that meet the guidelines of our MERP, that the ones that meet our short program, as well as those that are partnered with levels of government and nonprofit organizations. That being said, family housing in the city is something that we are hearing that there is not enough of, market or below market family housing, especially in neighborhoods such as this, where there are amenities like schools and coffee shops. And I think that it's really important that we consider that among the spectrum of affordability, also in looking at our tax base and how we fund our budget here at the City of Vancouver. So for that reason, I, again, will just state that I wholeheartedly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Weed.
Yeah, I'm supportive. 1.2 million is quite a smaller CAC than some of the other projects. I know we're getting rental out of this project, but I think we need to kind of justify, are we getting a small amount of rental or a larger CAC that we could put into more affordability and affordable rental projects in the area? So for me, it's a bit of a balance looking at some of the projects and trying to really quantify the value of the rental we're getting to what some of the other benefits would be to the neighbor. So that's been a bit of a balance for me on this project. However, I do think close to the SkyTrain, the form of the building, I think there were some good comments and changes by the applicant, so I will be supportive of it. But I do want us to kind of look at what levers we're using to make sure we're delivering the best benefits for the neighborhood. Thanks.
Thank you. That's it for Looks like questions. Just before we move to the vote, there have been a whole bunch of amendments that have come forward this evening and other meetings, and they do seem to come kind of on the fly. And I'm wondering if I can work with staff to come up with a process that if you have amendments that we can check and see if they're in order. So I will check back with the city manager and planning team about, but there would have to be some advanced submission to make that work. So I will come back with council with some suggestions as to how that might move ahead. With that in mind, though, we'll call a vote on this one. And that's passed with Councillor Swanson in opposition. Okay, on to the last one of the evening. We have rezoning on Cambie Street. I have the clerk read the application. That would be great.
This is an application by Arno Mattis Architecture Limited to rezone 4338-4362 Cambie Street from RS1 One Family Dwelling District to CD1 Comprehensive Development District to permit the development of a 6-story residential building with 68 strata residential units, including townhouses at the lane, increases to the permitted floor space ratio, FSR, from 0.70 to 2.75, and to the maximum building height from 10.7 meters, equivalent of 35 feet, to 20.5 meters, equivalent of 67 feet, are proposed. The following correspondence has been received since referral to public hearing and prior to the close of the speakers list and receipt of public comments. One piece of correspondence in opposition. This represents all correspondence received up to 5 p.m. today.
Thanks very much. We have Tess Monroe here from the Rezoning Center, and there are no speakers. So just wondering if anybody would want to hear the presentation. Again, if one person wants to see it, then I usually let it go ahead, but I don't see anybody nodding, so we'll waive the presentation. Thank you very much. Is the applicant team here? Great. Would you like to speak to this? Waive the presentation, but take questions. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. So I have Councillor Dejanova on for questions. Okay, thanks. Right, so we don't have anybody on the list and we have no questions, so I'm going to ask if there are anybody here that would like to speak to this, anybody from the public or in the gallery. Going once. I'll make a second call. And one more time. Last call, so there are no speakers. The speakers list is now closed. And we've had few or no public comments after 5 p.m. today, so we'll close the receipt of public comments and move on to hear closing comments and ask further questions. So does the applicant have any closing comments at all? Nope. Great. Thanks. Staff? Nope. Okay, thanks. Council, have any questions? I don't see any. Oh, I do see one. Councillor Dejanova or Councillor Wiebe, do you have...
Yeah, to staff, the 2 trees that are being retained, the 2 larger ones, how is that in the discussion with the proponent to ensure that those trees will survive and the roots and everything else? Because it's amazing how the building's been structured around. I really appreciate the architect finding ways to kind of protect those 2 large trees. But I'm just wondering, what do we do to ensure the life of those trees will be long living?
So they're included as a condition in the report. As part of that, the applicant did submit an arborist report and tree retention strategy as part of their application. That will be reviewed again at the development permit stage to make sure that their tree retention strategy is continuing through the process. And then subsequent permits will be issued according to that.
Okay, and we're seeing a lot of amenity spaces on the roof. Is that staff kind of recognizing as kind of a directive that we're looking proponents to come forward, or is that more the proponents coming forward looking for that outdoor kind of shared space?
Yeah, so as part of phase 3 of the Cambie plan, it was allowed for a partial amenity, indoor amenity room to be located on the roof, co-located with outdoor amenity space, and that was in response to increased livability of these family units in high-rise developments. So we're encouraging that, especially when it's a concrete building form that also has access already to the roof. This was providing access to the roof in an outdoor amenity, so it was a good spot to consider that location for an indoor amenity at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Councillor Deschanova?
I was happy to move the motion, seeing no one else on the queue.
Okay, thanks.
Wanted to say that I understand that the phase 3 of the Canby plan did make some specific policy, or does include specific policy that allows for unique features that other spaces might not in other area plans and district schedules. That being said, I'm satisfied that this not only will provide housing, family housing, and townhouses at the lane, which I think we see some of those on Canby Street already, and I think that it's really important that we look at that in a way to maximize space and family living opportunities. So for that reason, and hearing and understanding that does fit within our Housing Vancouver strategy. That being said, there may be some comments about them being strata residential units. That doesn't necessarily mean that these units won't house renters. And I wanted to make that very clear as well, because we often see strata units housing renters, and they also contribute to the rental market in Vancouver. So for that reason, and the fact that this conforms to and meets all of the in the policy report clearly states that it meets several policies, including the Canby Phase 3 plan, I am supportive of this project. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Councillor Swanson?
So I had my amendment ready, but I'm sure it would be ruled out of order. I just wanted to, again, raise the issue of affordability. I'm looking at the benefit plan here for the Canby corridor. There's over 10,000 units of housing planned. Less than 10% of them are social housing. Of those, less than 10%, or only 30%, would be at Hills. The median household income for renters is $50,000. And there's about $6 million of benefits here that could do a lot towards increasing affordability, but won't. And I think we have to get a huge handle on this so that we are, in fact, building the right supply. I also want to say that in my pre-council days, I was a member of the Downtown East Side Local Area Plan, and the Downtown East Side has a public benefits plan. And I can assure you that the community did not agree on that public benefit plan. I don't think we even saw it. It may have been passed by council, but I don't think the argument that the community wants is necessarily something that is true. So I'm going to vote against this because there's nothing in it that's affordable. We've spent the whole night approving things that aren't affordable to people under 50,000, and I don't think that's right.
Thanks. Councillor Weep?
Yeah, I just want to thank the proponent. I think that it's a beautiful design. I think you've challenged the norm, and I think that it's kind of needed on the corridor where we see in a lot of buildings of similar design. So I really appreciate that you're kind of breaking the kind of normal mold that we see in the buildings up there and the way you've kind of moved the building around to deal with the natural space. So I will be supportive.
Thanks very much. Councillor Deschanova?
I was actually going to comment on the design and say that I think it's courageous design, and in my own opinion, as Councillor Weeb explained, I think it will be a welcomed addition to the Canby corridor. That being said, I did want to say that every housing unit that we build contributes to the right supply. Every housing unit that we at the city enable to be built, is what I meant to say, contributes to the right supply, because people who perhaps are overhoused as renters, who may be able to purchase housing if we do build the right supply. I think that we have to consider the fact that our staff are very well aware and understand our Housing Vancouver strategy, and they keep that in mind in all of the policies that this conforms to and meets, and the recommendations that they bring to us. And to the point that this doesn't fit in rental housing, it's no different than the comments I made before. We can't deal with every every single item in one item at public hearing. It's a quasi-judicial body. We have to consider what's in front of us. And I think that it is incumbent on us to remember that and to acknowledge that this does meet the policy. And I wanted to state that again, just in my closing to this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Councillor Kirby-Young.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I do support this project, and in terms of the positives, there was one line that struck me in here, and I was sort of taken by the design. It says, the modernism building design is conceived as an homage to the stratigraphic rock formations at Queen Elizabeth Park. And that really stood out for me, and I really appreciate the context and the attention paid to the surrounding area. And I do think, though, that I really share Councillor Swanson's concerns around the dire need for lower level housing or in terms of income and the diversity of housing. But we do have approximately 630,000 odd people in the city who all need to live somewhere, and we need multiple types of housing. And so while we need to pay attention to the 2,223 homeless folks and the ones that need housing at sort of the more modest income levels, not everybody can afford a home or a single family home that people are buying, and we can't punish other people by not putting other housing types and stream into the market. And so I do think that it's a really important conversation, but it's separate from what we're being asked to approve here. And $4.4 million of a community amenity contribution is significant, and that will contribute to livability and some of the other goals that we have in the city. So we have to consider that in context, and constraining our housing supply, I don't think, is the means to achieve the other very important goals that Council aspires to do, and to really provide housing for those folks that truly need it. So all of that said, I think the design is innovative. It takes the context of the area into consideration, and it's nice to see the juxtaposition with the townhouses animating the lane as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Looks like it on the queue, so I'll call the vote. Councillor Boyle and Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Boyle. You can get a vote assist if you like. In favor. Okay. Thanks so much. That's passed with Councillor Swanson in opposition. Thank you so much, Council. That is it for this evening. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you. Seconder? Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Great. Thanks so much, Council. Look at that. Not even 8:30. And remember, we're not back here on Thursday night. So enjoy that night off. I thought it was I thought it was a public hearing reserve. Okay. Well, that puts the pressure on for tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks so much, everybody. See you tomorrow.